We've all been around them. People who are, well, their own greatest fans. They're always ready to tell you, or anybody else, just how wonderful they are. Well, here's an approach I hope you'll find refreshing. Welcome to Mornings with Bishop Robert. Thanks for joining me. Hey, come on in, have a seat. Make yourself comfortable. My goal is to introduce people to the Jesus they never knew, then help them get to know him and his word personally and better. So if our time together today speaks to your heart, let me invite you to like, subscribe, and also share this with a friend. You can't be around some folks for too long before they begin to recount their accomplishments or recount some of their greatest hits, so to speak. I was recently in a meeting with a ministry-related friend, and from the time he sat down until the time I left, about an hour later, we talked about him. Well, to be more accurate, he talked about him. I listened. He discussed his ministry, the invitations that he had received, the conferences that he had led, all the prophetic words he had received, and to make matters worse, very little, if any, of this was new information. He had spoken about it all before. Often. You know, it's easy for any of us to get consumed with ourselves. I can be part of the problem too. It's very easy to get caught up in discussing my work and my activity and my ministry. It's always been said, you never have to ask someone if they're a U.S. Marine. If they were, they'll find a way to tell you. And if they weren't, there's no sense embarrassing them. Well, that doesn't count. But when you begin to consider what God has worked in our lives and our relationships, those are the things that are really amazing. And that's what I want to focus on if I'm ever going to boast. Because to be absolutely honest, I have nothing to boast about. By the way, neither does the CEEC Church. Goodness gracious. Aren't we the most unlikely bunch of people to come and sit in a church ever? All dressed up, looking decent and nice, but who are we to even darken the door? Look at us. Who would believe it? Unquote. The Apostle Paul, 1 Corinthians. Now that was the BRV, the Bishop Robert version. But Paul did say it much more nicely when he wrote it, to be frank. He said God chose the foolish things of the world. That's us. To shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world. Yeah, you and me. To shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of the world. The despised things. The things that are nothing. Yeah, that's us. To nullify the things that are. So that no one can boast before him. That's what he actually wrote. I mean, look around. Look at yourself. Look at me. If you were God and you had the whole world to choose from, would you have chosen you to give the message of reaching the entire rest of the world with the message of the gospel? You got over 7 billion people to choose from. Would you pick you? Of course not. Me and you, we're not the global victory type of folks, are we? No one's likely to confuse us with Caesar or the king or George Washington But that's exactly the point. Today's verse says, if you want to boast, boast only in the Lord. God chose the foolish and the weak and the lowly. He chose those who were nothing. Then he added his spirit, his wisdom, his grace, his gifts, his holiness, his power, and that is how he chooses to reach the world. by involving us, you and me, in things so big and so great that no one would believe it was us. When the outcome's examined, no one in their right mind gets confused and wants to give us credit. Hey, think back to Moses. He's leading Israel out of Egypt when Pharaoh changed his mind, gathers his army, and begins to pursue them. Now, he's the leader of the greatest army on the planet at the time. And he's angry. His oldest son is dead. In fact, every person in the army's oldest son was dead. Their crops had been destroyed. Their homes had been invaded by bugs and frogs. And they were going to teach Israel a lesson they'd never forget. So chariots and horsemen and soldiers pursue a nation of nobodies, slaves. And they got them cornered against an ocean. And there's no escape from the greatest army on the planet. The only problem was they weren't going to be fighting an army from this planet. God causes such a strong wind to come up that the sea stood up in piles of water, huge walls of ocean, and the pathway through the middle blown dry by the wind. Israel passes through, and Egypt doesn't. Egypt's army is drowned. Horses and chariots destroyed, every last man. Today you could search the internet and see photos of the chariot wheels they've discovered under the deep water at the crossing site. The army of Egypt. Oh, they taught Israel a lesson, all right. They taught Israel that God is greater than any enemy they would ever face. But nobody, absolutely no one, walked up to Moses afterwards and said, "Wow, Mo, that was amazing. How did you do that?" Everyone knew it was God who acted, not Moses. It was God who delivered. Moses was just the messenger, just the leader. So if you're going to boast about what God has done. Boast about what God is doing. I'll boast about a communion with 2 million plus people and growing every day. Not because of me, only because of Him. I'll boast about churches being planted, relationships being restored, money being poured into missions, healings and miracles. I'll boast about the blind seeing. Why? Because I had little or nothing to do with any of it. I'll boast about refugees being rescued and orphans being saved from the Taliban. Because it's God alone, God in His mercy, God in His grace, God using His people to accomplish His will in His ways with His resources. Let's you and I determine to step out in faith and follow His lead, and then we'll be able to boast in the Lord. If you want to boast only about what the Lord has done. Look what the Lord has done, even through us. Isn't He amazing? Friends, that's all the time we've got this morning. But could I ask you to help me introduce Jesus to the people who never knew Him, but need to know Him, need to know His Word personally and better? Please like this video. It really does help more people see it. Then click follow or subscribe so you and I can get together every day. If you'd like a free copy of my book, Count to One, God's Plan for Christian Unity, just click the link in the description. I'll drop one in your inbox. Hey, one more thing. Would you please share this video with a friend? Because as you do, you're part of the team, touching hearts all over the world with the love of Jesus. Thanks for helping.